Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the media briefing related to the Flex Alert that is in effect for tomorrow, June 17th. This is Christina Osborne with ISO Stakeholder Affairs. I'm here to provide support for the meeting. Elliot Mainzer, who is California ISO's President and CEO, will be providing the update. This is a verbal update only. However, we are recording the event and will post the audio file on our public website. That'll be available later this evening. After we provide the update, there will be an opportunity for members of the media to ask questions. Please start by identifying yourself, including your name and affiliation. There will be a 2-question limit so that we have time to address as many questions as we can within the time allotted for this briefing. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Elliot Mainzer.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for joining the call this afternoon. I really appreciate it. I know everyone's very busy. I appreciate your interest. I think as you're all aware, earlier this afternoon, the ISO issued a Flex Alert for voluntary conservation tomorrow, Thursday the 17th, between 5 p.m. and 10 p.m. because of the extreme heat across California and in much of the Southwest. This, as you know, is the first Flex Alert we've had to call this year. And of course, we have been, our previous message the last couple of days has been focused primarily on the 4 to 9 p.m., but with an understanding that based off system conditions, that the actual hours of the Flex Alert can change. And in this case, based off the actual hourly projections for tomorrow's supply and demand conditions, our operations team has determined that this Flex Alert needs a slight shift in timing from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. I think as we know, Californians have stepped up many times before when asked to pitch in, and I'm confident that we'll do so. So for tomorrow, between 5 and 10 p.m. Thursday, we're asking people to set their thermostats to 78 degrees or higher if their health permits, to avoid using major appliances, and to turn off all unnecessary lights. I'd also like to point out that under these types of conditions, in California and across the West, there tends to be a lot of solar energy production, a lot of renewable energy on the grid. So we're actually also, being concerned about folks' comfort and well-being. We encourage them actually in the hours before the Flex Alert to actually pre-cool their homes or their apartments by lowering their thermostats and doing that pre-cooling. It's those hours before Flex Alerts where they can actually use their major appliances like dishwashers and clothes washers and dryers. They can actually further cool their homes by closing window coverings to keep their homes or apartments cooling, and that's the time in advance of the Flex Alert hours to charge electronic devices or to charge electric vehicles. But once we get into that 5 to 10 p.m. time frame, we really need folks to lean in, set those thermostats, as I said, to 78 degrees or higher. If the health permits, avoid using all major appliances and turning off all unnecessary lights. I want to point out at this time we are continuing to very closely monitor the grid conditions, temperatures, and load forecasts for tomorrow. We have not gone into emergency conditions. At this point, there's still some uncertainty about actually how things will turn out tomorrow. The current forecasts for shortages are relatively modest in magnitude, and we think there's a good chance that we'll be able to resolve them across the course of the day tomorrow. But in a preponderance of caution, we have issued the Flex Alert, and we really will need the help from consumers. And we certainly know from experience, including last August and September, that Californians can make a huge difference in helping to maintain overall grid stability by taking these very straightforward and pragmatic steps to help conserve. So I'm also joined this afternoon by Mark Rothleader, our Chief Operating Officer, and Didi Sabaki, our Vice President of System Operations. And we're all prepared to take some questions, and really appreciate your interest, and just want to make sure that you all know that we have my absolute commitment. We've learned certainly from last year the importance of very straightforward and clear communication on an advanced basis and across the course of events with our stakeholders across the spectrum, particularly the media, our partner utilities, consumers, industry, across the spectrum. We all need to work together here as California has embarked on a very significant transformation of its power industry. And as we now move into this new normal of these temperatures, here we are in mid-June with these kind of temperatures, we know that we've got to really bear down, focus, and work together to help California during this incredibly important transition to a decarbonized power system. So thanks again for your interest this evening, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Great. So if you do have a question, you can raise your hand by pressing pound 2. Just a reminder, we have a 2-question limit. And also please start by stating your name and affiliation. So Shreyas, let us know when anybody enters the queue, please.
Sure. I see several questions in the queue. Moving on to the first caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, it's James Taylor from CBS 13 News in Sacramento. Can you talk a little bit about what, if anything, has been done in the last year to prevent these rolling outages that we saw last year?
Yeah, thanks for the question. You know, a lot has been done. There is a significant amount of new power supply resources that are being brought onto the grid this summer in response to procurement orders from the California Public Utilities Commission in previous years and emergency orders this year. A significant amount of that additional capacity is going to be energy storage resources, in particular batteries, which are going to be absorbing extra solar energy during the course of the day and re-injecting that into the grid after sunset when loads are still high and the grid can get strained. There's been a significant focus on making sure that the generation fleet, the natural gas plants, the other resources are being maintained and planned to be operationally healthy during the peak summer conditions to the maximum extent possible. We've also worked very closely with the transmission providers in adjacent regions where we import a significant amount of power to make sure that the transmission lines are in good shape and we can import from the Pacific Northwest and other regions of the West. The ISO has made some improvements and changes to its market based off some of the lessons learned from last year to make sure that we're producing prices that reflect scarcity so that we can get imports from adjacent regions, and also to make sure that we have a really, really clear eye for what the supply and demand balance is. And I think we've also, as you've seen, really made a significant push to make sure that our Flex Alert program and the communication around it is done as effectively as possible. And we've tried to stay ahead of the curve by opening up heat wave bulletins and providing consumers with advance notice in case we think we're going to get into stress grid conditions. So we've characterized the situation going into this summer as guarded optimism. We do think that we are generally better positioned than last summer, but we have been very clear about the fact that we still have residual risk related to west-wide heating events like we've seen. And there has been degradation in the hydro conditions, just given the west-wide drought that we're seeing and having to monitor other conditions. So we're here today with our first sense of potential supply shortfalls for tomorrow. Again, I mentioned that at this point they're still looking rather modest, but we need to stay ahead of the curve, stay communicative, and make sure that consumers know what may be asked of them. And particularly in this case, we've now triggered the Flex Alert.
Shreyas, can we go on to the next question?
Sure. Moving on to the next caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Yeah, hi, this is Chris Ancarlo with KFI News down in Los Angeles. And I had one question specifically to compare this heat event with what we saw that obviously caused the rolling blackouts last summer. What's similar, what's different between what we saw then versus what we saw now? And can you put a number on the increased battery storage capacity?
Yes, I can. I'll start with the battery storage capacity. The expectation going into the summer is that we will have approximately 2,000 megawatts of battery storage capacity on the system. The expectation is for about a 1,500 to 1,700 megawatt increase. We're still waiting to see what the final numbers are on that. Some of them are still scheduled to be coming on board across the course of the summer, but a significant increase relative to last year. I'm going to let Mark Rothleader, who was very closely involved with last summer's events and has a good handle on the temperature deltas, to talk a little bit about how this particular heating event in terms of temperatures may compare to what we saw last summer. Mark?
Yeah, thank you. This heating event is not as intense as the August 14th, 15th events, nor Labor Day of last summer. The difference is, while there are some similarities in terms of the fairly high temperatures in the inland California area, especially in Southern California, and in the Southwest, this heat event does not have the same level of temperature intensity near the coast. And that may make the difference because that lower temperature not intense at the coast, probably makes up for 3,000 to 4,000 megawatts difference.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, moving on to the next caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Yes, hello. This is David Baker with Bloomberg News. You were saying that there are potential supply shortfalls for tomorrow. Could you give us an idea of how much megawattage we're looking at as a potential shortfall and what hours we may experience that?
Yeah, Mark, since you've been closest to dispatch this afternoon, I'm going to let you answer that question.
Sure. We're looking like the hours that are most critical are that 5 to 10 p.m. We're seeing potential shortfalls in the neighborhood of about 300 megawatts, and it's not unusual for us to be able to get 300 plus megawatts of response by a flex alert itself. So that's why we believe a flex alert is necessary and appropriate and gives us that buffer to absorb that 300 megawatt shortfall. There are other things that we can do to also try to absorb that. There's additional supply that we're still can access in real time that we can try to do that. But at the 300 megawatts, we believe the flex alert is sufficient to respond to that type of shortfall.
Thanks, Mark.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, it's J.D. Morris from the San Francisco Chronicle. I have two questions. First off, was just hoping you could address what steps you guys are taking to reduce energy consumption by large consumers. I know you did a number of things last year, like with the ports and such, to get some large power savings there.
Yeah.
And if you can answer that, and then I'll ask the second one.
Yes. At this stage, because we are, in a, I would say, a relatively modest expected deficit at this particular point in time, as Mark mentioned, about 300 megawatts. What we're doing is we are reaching out to those larger industrial customers and others that participate in our demand response programs and the utility demand response programs, just to establish points of contact, make sure that everybody knows that we're going to be monitoring grid conditions very carefully through the night and into tomorrow, and just clarify the points of contact and the criteria for dispatching those resources if necessary. So we're literally, as we speak, the outreach is happening to make sure that everybody understands what may be expected if conditions deteriorate to tomorrow. But certainly, I think there is some possibility that we won't have to call on them tomorrow if our forecasts and temperatures stay within the boundary conditions that we're expecting at this point. But as we've learned, conditions can change on the grid quite rapidly, so we have to watch it, and we need to be as prepared as possible, and that's been the strategy in reaching out.
Okay, got it. And then, secondly, obviously we saw what happened last summer with the issue at Panoche, unexpectedly reducing demand. Do you have any more room for error this year if something like that happens again?
Well, look, we're certainly at this particular juncture right now not as close to the edge as we were last year on an expected basis, but certainly the issues that came up last year in terms of making sure the communication protocols between ourselves and the scheduling coordinators, and I know the utilities have been looked further downstream in their communications with their power plants are as sharp and as crisp as possible. So certainly we don't want to see the repeat of anything like that this year, and I think we've put a lot of energy in across the board in making sure that the communication protocols are as sharp as possible.
Okay, great. Moving on to the next caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, this is Claudia Pesquita with KNX News Radio. Elliot, you touched on this earlier, but just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying correctly. So basically, you're cautiously optimistic that we can avoid rolling blackouts this summer, but can't say for sure?
That's right. I think, when we've looked at the supply-demand balance, when we've looked at all the resource changes and the improvements that have been made since last summer, certainly there are many conditions across the course of the summer where we think we will be fine, but we do know that because California continues to import a significant fraction of electricity from other regions, that when it gets hot here in California and it gets really hot as it is at the moment in Phoenix and in Salt Lake and in Portland and Spokane, that west-wide type of heating event can really stress the grid across the West, and that's when things get really tight. And that's really where we've really focused our efforts on the demand side. So some of the industrial programs that JD mentioned previously, but certainly now in the Flex Alert, we think that consumers across California through their own individual actions can be a real difference maker to help preserve overall system reliability. So yes, we've been trying to be very transparent with everyone that we have that residual exposure, and we need to work together across the summer to keep the lights on for all of us.
All right, thank you.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Oh, hi. Deborah Kahn with Politico. I was wondering about hydropower supplies. Just because runoff is way lower than the state projected earlier in the spring. So how is hydro doing? Is it significantly lower than you had projected in your summer assessment?
It's definitely been moving in the wrong direction. We've seen the continued heating and the drought, and certainly inside California, we're watching the reservoir levels, watching Lake Oroville and other reservoir levels very closely, working with the State Water Project, keeping an eye on all the other hydro systems. I think many of the hydro resources are acutely aware right now of these conditions, and I think the hydro operators are doing their very best to optimize their production into the hours of the day when we think we run into the most exposure, but certainly it's not been moving in the right direction relative to our earlier projections. And of course, we're also watching the hydro conditions up on the Columbia River, where we do a lot of importing out of the federal system and the non-federal hydro up in the Northwest. And I think the Columbia is at about 81% of average for this year. So yes, certainly the hydro conditions are strained, and it's just another variable that's keeping us super focused, and again, making sure that everybody understands their role in overall system reliability.
Thanks. Do you have any kind of concrete estimate of how much lower average hydro is than you projected back in March?
Mark, let's talk about that. I know that we're literally in the process today, last few days, of sort of sharpening those numbers. What's the rule of thumb, the very, very latest out of operations today, Mark, that you might want to estimate?
I apologize. I don't have a new number that I can quantify that. We can certainly try to get that to you. But the point is made, as Elliot made, is that while the energy content is lower because there's less water, the indications are that that water will be conserved for those peak hours when we most need it. And so I'll have to get back to you on the percentage that we're at in terms of the hydro.
Yeah, that's under current analysis, and so yeah, as we get more information on that, we'll make it available.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, this is Rob Nikolewski from the San Diego Union Tribune. Did you guys anticipate that you might have a Flex Alert this week because of the statewide heat wave, or did this come as a surprise?
I can't say it's a surprise. Last week, what we've committed to this year is to really try to stay, about 7 days out, really looking forward at temperatures and loads. Last Friday, we issued our first heat wave bulletin for this event as we saw it coming, the initial indication that this was going to be really hot for June. We updated that heat wave bulletin on Monday morning just to keep folks posted. So we've known that this kind of condition was well within the realm of possibility, and we've tried to communicate that to consumers, and here we are today on Wednesday afternoon now, triggering our first Flex Alert. So yeah, we're going to continue to do that across the course of the summer. We're just real believers that very, very straightforward and transparent communication, providing the best information that we've got, is just really important to all of you in the media who play a really important partnership role in conveying this information and helping us get the message out, quite frankly, to consumers. Your broadcasts through various media can be really helpful in getting these messages out. We're trying to keep it really tight and straightforward and consistent. But yes, we certainly felt that this was in the realm of possibility, and quite frankly, it's in the realm of possibility again for tomorrow, for Friday, if temperatures persist. So just know that you have a partner here in the ISO, and I know that the PUC and the Energy Commission, the Governor's Office, all of us working very, very, very closely together to try to get this information out as clearly as possible.
Then one other question. I'm looking at the outlook right now on your website, and currently the current demand is 38,099 megawatts. Forecasted peak for today is 39,675. For the uninitiated, is a 1,500 megawatt differential between current demand and forecasted peak. Is that a lot? Is that a little? Are we running on the edge? If you could just give us some idea about that.
Yeah, my gut is it's probably not an extraordinary delta relative to traditional forecasting. Of course, for this evening, yesterday after we were looking forward to today, we felt that we could make it through today without a flex alert, and I think that that's proving the case so far. The further you get out, the more uncertainty there is. Tomorrow there is still some uncertainty about exactly how the temperatures will show up and how loads will respond. And even though on an expected basis right now the shortfall is only around 300 megawatts, that could grow. Our hope is that through our actions and through consumers' steps that will shrink, and we will resolve ourselves and be able to work through the days no problem. But we just need to stay ahead of it. So electricity forecasts always have a certain band of error in them, and I don't think we're outside of the band of uncertainty today, and we'll keep monitoring it for tomorrow as well.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi there. This is Colby Vermel at Politico. I have two questions. My first question is with regards to resource adequacy. I wanted to ask about what changed in between CAISO saying yesterday that there would not be enough resource adequacy on Thursday night, and then CAISO saying today that there will now be enough reserves to cover demand for tomorrow evening. Did CAISO or the other agencies take action like to strengthen RA capacity, or did this naturally come about?
Yeah, I'm gonna let Mark start just because he's seen the specific deltas between today and yesterday, and I'll embellish if necessary. But Mark, in terms of what's changed specifically from yesterday today in terms of our views on Thursday, why don't you just roll through that real quick?
Well, I don't think anything's really changed in terms of the resource adequacy capacity. Our loads and our reserve requirements are exceeding the amount of the resource adequacy capacity. There is other capacity that has been bid in and made available that we're utilizing, and it's the comparison to that other capacity even above and beyond the resource adequacy capacity that we're now making the determination that we may have some shortfalls, and that's why we're calling the flex alert. So the conditions relative to the resource adequacy capacity have not changed from yesterday to today.
Yep.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hello, this is Mark Chedia. Can you hear me? Bloomberg News?
Yes.
Mark. Yep, gotcha.
Okay, sorry. Hey, I was just wondering if you guys could comment directly about the risk of having a call for rotating outages tomorrow. I know you said that you're looking at a shortfall, but it's relatively modest, and it sounds like you expect to make that up with conservation and other measures. But if you could just directly address the possibility of any need to go into an emergency situation, that would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yeah, and I think the previous comments about on an expected basis right now, the deficit that we're seeing is relatively modest at 300 megawatts, and I think our base case is that through consumer conservation and other purchases that we will be able to resolve that. So I think the probability as we sit here this evening at roughly 4:30 in the afternoon is relatively low. But as I've stressed before, conditions can change, And so we'll be very carefully monitoring across the course of the evening and into tomorrow to see if things deteriorate, and we will continue to communicate very effectively, not only with the public, but obviously with our partner utilities and the other operators across the West.
Great. And just one follow-up question, if you don't mind. Given that, we're in early, I guess mid-June now, and we're already sort of looking at, tight supplies, is there a concern that things could get worse as we get deeper into summer when it gets hotter and the hydro resources will continue to diminish or be much lower? What's your sense of the outlook for the rest of the summer, if you can give it?
Yeah, it's the right question. I mean, all of us, recognize. We all recognize that. I think we think of it as we sort of moved into a new. There are these uncertainty variables about how temperatures may play out. How likely is a wide heating event? Historically, that's been a very low probability event. With climate change and changes in drought conditions and just the weather's playing out, we're seeing these happening more frequently. So, our strategy has just been to be as prepared as possible. Obviously, there's a finite amount of new generation capacity that we've been able to bring on, since last year. So that's coming on board. And of course, making sure that the power plants in the system are maintained and that their outages are scheduled away from the peak periods to the maximum extent possible is really important. That work with our we have many partners across the West, utilities in other states we work very closely with on the exchange of energy back and forth between our systems. That coordination we've hosted readiness roundtables with utilities, et cetera. So the coordination and communication has been very good. But, at the end of the day, I think the message has been very clear when we talk about guarded optimism. It's guarded optimism, and certainly the changes in the hydro conditions, put a little bit more emphasis on the guarded than the optimism. So we just need to stay really communicative, really on top of the issues, and again, our partnerships with consumers and their role in those modest changes that they can make in their consumption patterns in, that whether it's 5 to 10 tomorrow evening or, 4 to 9 other nights, depending on how the system is playing out, is just really important. And, I've said before, California's embarked on a very ambitious strategy to decarbonize its grid at a time when some of the effects of climate change are now really manifesting themselves in front of our very eyes. And so all of us have a role to play in working together to get through these stress grid conditions, and hopefully we can minimize the number of events and keep the lights on for the overall system. And we're optimistic that if we just stay really focused and folks lean in with us, that we can minimize the probability of rotating outages.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, this is Dinora Perez, a news reporter here with Telemundo in Los Angeles. In Southern California, we've had quite a heat wave all week, and it's going on to Friday night. You mentioned that we have a modest shortfall. Is there any way you can quantify how much in percentage or how much that would be and why it was done specifically for Thursday? And are we expecting this to continue through Friday on as well?
Yes, right now, if you think about it, I think our forecast for tomorrow ranges between, about 43,000 to 46,000 megawatts in that ballpark. The expected shortage at this point after after administering the market today, as I mentioned, was about 300 megawatts. It's a, very relatively small on a percentage basis. And because we, anytime we see the potential for an expected shortage after we've run the day-ahead market, that is a condition for triggering the flex alert and asking consumers to help us out. So that's, today, when we ran the market yesterday and we looked forward to today, we felt as though we would be able to work through the evening hours tonight without needing to call on a flex alert. Right now, that seems to be playing itself out. For tomorrow, Thursday, the temperatures are hotter, loads are hotter, imports, some changes there, and we felt as though, based off the run at 300 megawatts expected deficit, it was time to call the flex alert. So, it's relatively small small fraction, but those are the criteria that we use to make that determination.
Elliot, I may just add that Friday's current forecast is about 1,000 megawatts less than Thursday's forecast.
Okay, there you go. There you go. So that may be moving in our right direction, but you just can't say it enough when you administer an electricity grid. There's just a lot of moving pieces: the generators, loads, imports, exports, transmission lines, power plants, you name it. And those uncertainty variables, sometimes they move in your favor and sometimes they move against you. You just have to be absolutely acutely aware of what's happening and try to stay ahead of the curve to maximize the probability of successful operations.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, it's James Taylor from CBS 13 in Sacramento again. Can you talk about geographically, are there any sort of concerns for a specific part of the state, or is this going to be a potential statewide issue, like, say south of Path 15 or something? Is that an area of more concern, or is it across the entire state? And then also, are we looking at using any sort of our peaker plants for this particular week? Thank you.
For sure. Yeah, Mark, why don't you talk a little bit about the distribution of the heat, how it's playing out, just even this, in the very, very latest forecast and the deployment of the peaker plants that we'll be leaning on for tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks. In terms of the location, this is not a specific location issue. This is a system-wide issue. We may experience some congestion north to south across Path 26. Which is kind of the Grapevine area, but that we don't expect that to be a factor. In terms of the peakers, yes, as defined by the name, we will be using those peakers today, tomorrow, and probably Friday to get across the evening peaks, again, from probably across that 5 o'clock to about 10 o'clock period. So yes, we will be using those peakers as necessary.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, it's Dale Kassler with the Sacramento Bee. I think there's a follow-up question from Mark from something that was asked earlier. You talked about other capacity having been bid into the market in the last day or so. Could you elaborate on that? Because I remember last year there was a lot of talk about how you couldn't find any imports, or you had trouble finding imports because the whole West was in the heat wave. Are you finding it easier to get power this time around?
Yeah, so there are some economic imports that are coming in. The Northwest is not. It's not a wet Northwest event, so there is some additional bid-in energy coming in from there. But also, you have to remember this is June, and the resource adequacy requirements in June are a bit less than what they are in August and September. So there are some even internal resources that are potentially not contracted or not are resource adequacy capacity resources that do offer and do bid into the market, and we will take advantage of those as well.
Okay.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hey, Joe, this is Colby Vermel again from Politico. I was cut off when trying to ask my second question. I wanted to ask about imports. I know that last summer, of course, because there was a West-wide heat dome, that every state was basically scrambling for every electron that it could get, and which meant that California couldn't rely as much on imports. And of course, it's the same now appears to be the case again this year, with much of the West being under the heat. And I wanted to ask, what could be done to address this thematic issue of being over-reliant on imports?
In the short term, obviously, very limited. I think in the longer term, and certainly if you look at the recent actions coming out of the California Public Utilities Commission, there'll be a final vote here later this month on as much as 11,500 megawatts of additional procurement for the next several years. So that will be a major contribution. And then, it's a really complicated question in many ways because, we are members of a vastly interwoven Western electricity market. We've been importing and exporting energy with the Pacific Northwest and the Desert Southwest and the Mountain West for many, many years. Our transmission system in the West was really built to accomplish that. So we need to continue really evaluating what is sort of a healthy level. We're at about 25% now of imports, and we have to start increasingly making sure that we have contingency plans and strategies to deal with those extreme events when the entire West heats up at the same time. And I think this summer is going to provide a lot of additional insight, in terms of are we really moving into a mode where what we used to consider sort of 1 in 30 type events really are becoming truly a new normal, which will force some level of rethinking of what that dependency could look like. But at the same time, I always like to point out, just today we announced a new member of our Western electricity imbalance market, our energy imbalance market. Northwestern Energy in Montana joined that market today. It's another utility that continues to work with us here at the ISO, optimizing our resources across this broad geographic portfolio. And that interdependency and those relationships and that ability to leverage regional diversity has historically been a real asset for us. So we want to maintain the positive benefits of that and continue working together across the West on our energy markets. But we all need to look, whether here in California or in the Desert Southwest or Northwest, we all need to understand what level of dependency we can have on those imports before we start getting stressed. So that will be an issue that we'll continue to look at in the years ahead through procurement decisions.
Thanks so much. And just wanted to ask also quickly, if I may, just in terms of any of the imports and exports or other kind of market activity, have you seen any suspicious behavior yet that could lead you to think that any market manipulation could be occurring? And what steps are being taken right now to ensure it doesn't happen?
Well, look, we always monitor for that very, very carefully. Of course, our Department of Market Monitoring is really an eagle eye on those issues. That's what they were established for. And every one of us here at the ISO, and I know my partners in the state agencies, governor's office, take the integrity of our markets extremely seriously. It's so important. And fortunately, last year there was a lot of work done to take a look to see whether there's any evidence of market manipulation. I think the Department of Market Monitoring found absolutely no evidence of strategic withholding or market manipulation. So at this point, we have no reason to believe that's happening. I think generally we've found that the generation community in California has been very constructive and working hard to really help maintain the reliability of the system. Our partners from out of state, really, they rely on the imports and exports in many ways like we do. So I think there's a lot of folks on integrity, but ever vigilant and constantly looking out for that. And if we see it, there's the consequences.
I do not see any further questions in the queue.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, look, I'd like to thank you all again. Mark, Edie, thank you guys. Thank all of you for joining us. I want to just end the call by just emphasizing that, we really look at all of you in the press and the media as partners in this issue. You're always going to look for accountability and ask good questions, but your ability to help us carry these messages to consumers, to industry, and to help people understand the nuances of these issues, the scale of the change that we've taken on, the importance of successfully delivering on this promise of reliable decarbonization, and the partnership with consumers is really important. So thank you all for your interest, and we're going to keep the information flowing and be doing everything we can here, of course, across the next 24 hours with all our partners to keep the lights on. So thanks again for your interest, and we look forward to staying in touch. All the best.
Great, thank you. And just if you do have any follow-up questions and you're with the media, you can send those to isomedia@CAISO.com. And then some of the tools that Elliot talked about earlier, the heat wave bulletin, Flex Alert, System Conditions Bulletin, those are available out on the news page. So if you go to our website, go to About Us, and then select News from the drop-down, you'll find that information there. So thank you all for joining us. We greatly appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your day.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.